Delegate Darrell Coles is from Morgan County. He was elected to the chamber in 2006 and serves as the House Majority Leader. Senator Ryan Ferns is the Majority Leader in the Senate. He was elected to the body in 2014 after serving in the House. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
It's good to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start with the budget because, Delegate, there were a couple of members who stood up on the House floor today and said, "What's the plan? When are you going to share it with us?" You responded on the floor this afternoon. What'd you have to say?
I did. We had a good discussion in the House today, but you know, we're working on the budget. The budget process is that it's a process. We need to go through to examine the governor's proposal, but I think it's fair to say in the House we're more interested in tightening the state budget's belt to making sure the state government lives within its means and not being too quick to go to the taxpayer and say we need more of your money to help fund the programs that we have. But at the same time, we can be reasonable, have good state government programs that people need and depend on, but find a way to live within our means.
The governor presented a new budget plan earlier this week that essentially dropped some of the rates of the taxes he initially proposed and added some new ones, like a 1-cent soda tax. I think it's 1 cent per ounce, 50 cents on cigarettes, which you guys approved a bill to increase the cigarette tax last summer as well. Senator, why don't we start with you, because you strongly opposed the governor's initial plan that raised taxes, I think, $450 million. How do you feel about this new proposal?
I think the new proposal is just more of the same. As you mentioned, it's a shifting around of taxes. It tells me that the governor and didn't have confidence in his own first proposed budget. I mean, at this point, he's essentially negotiating with himself. You know, he puts out a budget, he asks the legislature to respond. We go to work on our budget, as you said. No budget's ever been produced prior to the end of the session. That is a goal for us this year, but that's not the normal action of the legislature. But within a couple weeks, he goes out and proposes another budget. It shows that he lacks confidence in his own plan. And the sad part about that is his staff and he himself had been out promoting that first budget, which he now has abandoned himself. So it was a lot of wasted time, a lot of wasted taxpayer resources promoting a budget that he himself has now abandoned.
Now, the budget process can be a little bit complex, and I'm no expert. This is only my 5th session, but in the past, what we've seen, at least from Governor Tomlin, is he presents a budget plan. In the past, he did present some tax increases, and those come in the form of a separate piece of legislation. Have either of you seen a piece of legislation from the governor's office yet to increase a tax?
I think some of those bills are introduced.
Have they been introduced?
They haven't seen much action yet, but I think there's been some introduced.
I think some of them have been, but as far as some of the new tax proposals that he's made in his most current budget, I'm not sure if all of those have been introduced. It's a little bit hard to keep up with all the different taxes the governor's proposing. It gets to be a little confusing. I know as legislators it's confusing. I'm sure it is for the public as well.
Delegate, let's talk about the overall plan, though. This 1 cent on the per ounce of soda, the 50 cents on cigarette. It also includes a hike in the sales tax and this tax for businesses. How do you feel about this new plan?
Well, it's a long list. It's a little different from the first plan, but the end result is the same. The solution that the governor's looking for is to go to the taxpayers to raise more money from the taxpayers to try to fund government that's bigger than we can afford right now. So I think in some ways the taxpayers expect us to reduce the size of government first before we come knocking on their door for more money.
Well, the governor has said that he's open to hear any suggestions about where you can make cuts in state government. Delegate, why don't we start with you? Do you have any specific areas that you think there are cuts to be made?
I do. I think there are cuts to be made. There's shifting we can do in state government. Pension smoothing, I think, has been talked about by the governor's office, the Senate, and the House. It may be something we can look at, but there's an opportunity for tax reform to try to collect some revenue up front, whether that's broadening the sales tax base, eliminating some exemptions that we currently provide today. Those are the kind of things we can do to enhance revenue. The governor's introduced $27 million worth of cuts, but anywhere in state government that we think is not returning a good value for the taxpayer, we should take a good solid look at and come up with a list of priority of what the state government should be doing and fund what we can afford.
Senator, do you see any places to make cuts just yet?
Well, that's actually the activity of the Finance Committee in the Senate right now. We've broken into different work groups to break up the various areas of the budget and see where the most savings can be had. I mean, if you look at the budget, you know that we have the DHHR area, we have education, we have lottery, and so the Senate Finance Committee right now has broken into those work groups. I think the House is doing the same, going through there line by line and determining where the most savings can be found, and that is where we'll go to produce our budget.
And it seems that the budget is kind of, because of the Senate's work on the budget, the Senate as a whole seems to be in a holding pattern right now. I mean, I don't mean any disrespect, but the House is having these long floor sessions and debating a lot of bills, and Senate floor sessions this week at least have been very short. Is that what it is?
Well, I don't know that, I haven't seen the House's activity, but I think the work that I'm talking about wouldn't produce bills necessarily. I mean, there's certain areas of the budget that would be reduced that wouldn't require legislation. And so that work is being done in those work groups within the Finance Committee, and that type of work wouldn't be seen on the Senate floor.
So both the House and Senate Finance Chairmen joined me in the first week of our program, and they both said by 30 days they want to have a spending plan to present to both chambers. 30 days, I think we hit next Thursday. Delegate, is that the mission of the leadership? Are we going to see something at day 30?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think we're about on schedule for some sort of framework or spending plan or direction of where the budget is and how it's taking shape. I expect we're close to that, if not right on 30 days.
And in the work in the Senate Finance Committee, are we close enough to the 30-day mark to get it done?
I agree. I agree with what the Majority Leader in the House said. I think that the governor suggesting that he's put this clock out there and that the legislature is falling behind. As I mentioned before, no legislature has ever produced a budget prior to the end of session, but I do think that this legislature is on track to make that historic mark and produce a budget well in advance of the completion of the session.
Well, I'd like to talk to you both about some of your other priorities this session. And Delegate, why don't we start with you, because education is a big one for you. What would you like to see come out of the House this session in terms of education reform?
Well, it is, and it's getting a lot of notice in the House right now. And some of the debate we've had on the floor has been over some education bills. But I think the idea of education reform is about empowering local school systems and local schools and local teachers and principals to have charge of their school. Those are the concepts of the things we're seeing. But it also transitions to higher education. We'd like to move more control from the central government down to the institutions themselves to make more decisions. And actually, as it relates to the budget, use money more efficiently and effectively for what they see they need to do.
Well, the education chairman also on this show earlier this session, and that was one thing that they stressed, is there's a potential for an impact to local funding because of the budget crisis that we're in, but in turn will give you flexibility. Senator, should people at home be worried about the state school aid formula, about the amount of money each county receives per child to fund education?
I don't think there should be concern or worry about the school aid formula. I do think that, as Daryl said, with increased flexibility, I think there's potential for savings. And I think that's very much something the Senate's been looking at as well, both in higher education and public education. Tell us what type of flexibility would allow you to operate more efficiently so that we can realize those savings in the budget.
Okay. Delegate Daryl Coles and Senator Ryan Ferns, the majority leaders in both the House and the Senate. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.